part of the process.
Okay, now I see a TBI screen coming up. So do I click in the screen where the arrow is, the triangle?
You don't have to do anything. It's already live. That can stay open or it can be closed.
Okay.
Doesn't make any difference. It was just setting that up in the background. I see you out on Facebook. So that's where you are.
Wonderful.
And whatever is on your screen, Rachel,
yeah,
is what will be shown on Facebook.
Okay.
Right. So if you only want the person speaking, then you should be on speaker view if you want everybody or whatever.
Okay.
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 And because that's actually where you will probably get people more than on Zoom, because it pops up in people's feed. It says Temple Beth Israel is live, and they say, "Huh, I wonder what that is," and they go there. So, okay. And that's where I'm going to watch.
Oh, okay. Well,
that's where I'm going to be involved, but I wanted to get you set up and have you going. So
I appreciate that. And I'm honored to have you be there in the background.
Absolutely. I don't, So, and if there's any problems, send me a text, but there shouldn't be.
Okay. All
okay.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. So, Yvonne and Simon, go ahead and unmute yourselves.
Okay.
Hello there.
Hi.
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 How are you this evening in your garden room?
I'm actually pretty good. It's been quite a full weekend because I was doing services down at Leisure World last night and this morning. So, it was a pretty full weekend, and I came home and I've been resting all afternoon. So now
that was in person, was it? In person?
Yeah, in person. Well, they do hybrid now.
Yes.
And the hybrid works very well on Saturday morning because now they get a minion.
Oh.
And Friday night, we never had any trouble getting a minion, but now we have even more of a minion on Friday nights.
Good.
And there's a few people that really can't come in person, so the hybrid works out well.
Mm.
And they have this big sophisticated setup. It's part of the Leisure World thing. So there's a big conference room set up with a huge screen on the wall and a computer connection. So then they give me a microphone, so I talk into the microphone. I'm on this monitor, and then we can rotate the camera. Anyway, this weekend it worked really nice. The last time I was there, it was still pretty ragged, but I think we're getting pretty good with the technology.
Yeah. Sheila's having a very tough time. I don't know. It's just going to be, she's on medications and seeing a therapist and what have you, but she's having an extremely tough time.
Yeah.
Mentally.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Her husband did everything. I mean, he just driving, and she does drive a little, but he did most of the driving and everything really. And just to go so suddenly like that, just unexpected. And of course it happens to so many people, but
you're never prepared for it. You're never prepared for it.
And he'd lost his brother about 3 months before. So they'd been comforting the wife, now they're both comforting each other. So
yeah. Now she has a son who's local, right? Or
I'm sorry?
She has a son, right, who's local?
Her son is very local. He's only maybe 10 minutes away. Okay. So he's of course he works, but he's very hands-on with her.
Yeah.
His wife has lupus, so she has quite a bad medical. So they more or less brought up their grandson. Yeah. So, it's hard. Anyway, I wish I lived closer. I really do.
Yeah. Well, I didn't think about, visiting her while we were down there, but I actually have her number. I should give her a call. I'll try to do that this week.
She would appreciate it, really.
I know she would.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, since we're live streaming, and I don't know if Howard's going to make it or not, and we'll figure everyone else is on Facebook. So
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and start, and I'm gonna assume that I have a minion, and if we're not sure, we'll count the cat as one body.
You may have people on YouTube also that you wouldn't even know about.
That's right. I could have people on YouTube. So I'm gonna be sharing documents. And is there a chance that we can do some of the English readings antiphonally? Would that be okay with you?
Oh,
Okay.
definitely, yes.
And if anyone else comes on Zoom, oh, okay, there's Catherine. Wonderful.
Oh,
Then,
that's-
good evening, Catherine. I won't say happy Tisha B'Av because there's nothing happy about it, but thank you for joining us.
Should I mute us?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and mute for right now, and then when we do antiphonal readings, or if you have something to say, unmute yourself and go ahead and say it. So tonight we're observing Tisha B'Av, which is how we kind of get started with the days of awe. It's our starting point for getting solemn and focusing on what we can do differently. So a little bit of introduction about it. Tisha B'Av officially commemorates the destruction of both the first and second temples, both of which were destroyed on the 9th of Av, the first by the Babylonians in 423 BCE, and the second by the Romans in 69 CE. Now there's some dispute over how the dates are calculated. So the presumption is, at least for one of them, the destruction took a period of several days, one of which was the 9th of Av. So it counts for both of them being on the 9th of Av. Although the observance is primarily to commemorate the destruction of the temples, it's traditional to consider all the other tragedies that have occurred on this day, such as the crushing of the Bar Kokhba revolt in 133 CE, the expulsion of the Jews from England in 1290 CE, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, the beginning of World War I in 1914, which by general historical consensus led to World War II and the Holocaust. So it's the culmination of a 3-week period of incrementally increasing mourning, which began with the fast of the 17th of Tammuz that commemorated the first breach of the walls of Jerusalem before the temple was destroyed. So one of the interesting things is there's all kinds of write-ups on 2 millennia worth of events, disasters that have happened on the 9th of Av. And you can always find something terrible and something wonderful on any day of the calendar. By the time we have 2,000 years, there's no shortage of events if you're looking for events. So the historical perspective, while being interesting, isn't necessarily the most primary concern today. And of course today it's debatable how much we mourn the temple versus what meaning do we find today in remembering the destruction of the temple. So why do we fast on Tisha B'Av? Welcome, Kylie, welcome. I want to start with a kind of a poem, a reading that was written by Rabbi Tal Sessler, who is the actual incoming dean of the rabbinical school at AJR. And he's actually a very nice man. I didn't happen to take any classes with him because he started teaching there after I left. But he wrote this really beautiful text, which he's given me permission to share. So what I'm going to do is share, we're just doing excerpts. So I'd like to do this, it's in English, reading it antiphonally. And so, Yvonne, would you and Simon be willing to do this with me antiphonally?
Yes.
And this is what he's entitled it. Why do we fast on Tisha B'Av?
You want us to respond?
Yeah, I'll read the first bullet and you read the second, okay?
And we'll read the next one.
And then you'll read the next one.
And then you'll read the next one. We'll
And then-
alternate.
Yeah, we'll alternate.
Got it.
Okay, so why do we fast on Tisha B'Av? We fast on Tisha B'Av in solidarity with those amongst us who were expelled from their homes or dispossessed.
We fast in remembrance of those who were baselessly imprisoned or mock executed or executed in actuality.
We fast in undying solidarity across time and space with all the countless martyrs of our people.
And we also fast as an exercise in cosmic humility. Modern man at times errs by feeling invincible. We know not hunger. And with the new technologies, the world and all its know-how is literally at our fingertips. But as the great Rabbi Soloveitchik brilliantly observed, man is finite, and so is his victory.
We fast, in the words of the Mishnah, in order to remind ourselves that with all our fancy and silly airs of pretentiousness and pathetic self-importance, our humble physiological origin is simply from a drop of seed, and that in the end, when all is said and done, the final physical destination which awaits us all is, in the succinct words of our sages, a place of dust where worms consume the flesh.
We fast in sacred protestation of the awesome and deadening gap between the superficiality of the image-based existence which we lead and the life which God expects us to lead.
We fast because our soul is in exile, in metaphysical captivity, banished from its pristine origin in God Almighty.
We fast in an effort to achieve an internal shift from the shackles of worldliness and egoism and into the promised land of soulfulness and altruism.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. See everybody again here. So that's our introduction to Tisha B'Av in the 22nd century. And I think it's meaningful. So for our Tisha B'Av service, we start with a weeknight Mariv service. So I'm now going to share the PDF of the Mishkan Tefillah, and it's Mariv is a fairly short, simple service, but we're going to do it with non-traditional melodies, more of a plaintive dirge type chanting instead of joyous singing and Shabbat celebration. So I'm going to find it. Here we go. Okay. So we're going to start with our Baruchu. So please rise with me for the Baruchu. Baruchu et Adonai HaMevorach. And you respond. Simon, would you unmute it and respond? Give us the response, please.
Baruch Adonai Mevorach Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Vaed. Thank you, Simon. Thank you. So, continuing with our Mariv prayer, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro mari vardavim, b'chokhma poteach she'arim, uvitvuna mesanetim, umachalif et hazmanim, umesadir et hakochavim, b'mishmerotehem barakia kiritzono, bore yom v'alayla, kolel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or, ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב ערבים. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, who brings on evening. And now we continue with our traditional Ahavat Olam. Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael, Amcha Ahavta. Torah u'mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim, otanu lemadata. Al kein Adonai Eloheinu, b'shochveinu u'v'kumeinu, nasiach b'chukecha, v'nismach b'divrei toratecha, ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגע יומם ולילה, באהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. And that's so important, especially tonight when we're focusing on doom and destruction, evil in the world, that we continually remind ourselves that God loves us, that we have a spiritual connection with the Holy One based on love, not based on vengeance and anger, but love. And so now we come to our Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, Leholam Vaed. And continuing with our Ve'ahavta. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol meudecha ve'hayu advarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavacha hayom levavecha Vishinantam levanecha, vidibarta baham, bishivtecha bavetecha, uvlaktecha vaderech, uvishoch becha, uvekumecha, וקשרתם לאות על ידך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Amen.
אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. So Emmet, I'm wondering if I have a volunteer to read Emmet in the English. All this we hold true.
Yes. From all this we hold.
All this we hold, yes.
All this we hold to be true and trustworthy for us. You alone are our God, and we are Israel, your people. You are our sovereign and savior who delivers us from oppressors' hands and saves us from tyrants' fists. You work wonders without number, marvels beyond count. You give us life and steady our footsteps. You performed miracles for us before Pharaoh, signs and wonders in the land of the Egyptians. You led your people Israel out from their midst to freedom for all time. When your children witnessed your dominance, they praised your name in gratitude, and they accepted your sovereignty. Moses, Miriam, and all Israel sang to you together, lifting their voices joyously.
Beautiful, thank you. Mi chamocha bailim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tehiloto sefeler, malchutecha rauvanecha, bokei yam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, Ze'elianu v'yamru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. V'ne'emar kifat Adonai et Yaakov, u'koelo miyad chazak mimenu. Baruch atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael. And so we come to our evening Hashkivenu. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, v'ha'amidenu shomreinu l'chaim, ufros aleinu sukat shlom mecha, v'tatnenu b'tzah tova milfanecha, v'hosheinu l'man shemacha, v'hagein ba'adenu, v'haser me'aleinu oyev dever, v'cherev ra'av yagon, v'harachek mimenu avon v'afesha, uv'etzel knafecha tastirenu, ki el shomreinu matzilenu ata. Hilchanun v'rachum ata, v'shmor tzeitenu v'oenu l'chaim u'l'shalom, me'ata v'yad olam. Baruch atah Adonai, shomer amo Yisrael ad. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel. And so our Chetzi Kaddish, again, different melody. Yikadal vikadash meraba bielma divrach irte vayamlik mochute b'chayechon uviyomechon uv'chayedechol beit Yisrael b'agalav isman karev yimru amen. Yehesh meraba mevorach l'olam l'almei almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitromam v'yitnasei v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalo shemei d'kudisha b'richu Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata Da'amiron bi'alma v'yimru. Amen. And now we come to our tefillah, our weekday Amidah. So please rise, and I'll keep this up. Most of it will be silent, but we'll chant the avot and give rote parts. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'yemotenu. Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah. Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chastei Avot v'Yimahot, U'mevii Geulah Livnei B'neihem, L'man Shemo B'Yahava. Melech Ozer Moshiach Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham v'Yisrat Sarah. Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayeh Hakol atah Rav Lehoshia, Morid Hatol, Mechalkel Chayim Bechesed, Mechayeh Hakol Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim, V'Rofei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayim Emunato Lishnei Afar, Mechamocha Bahal Givurot, Umidom Melach, Melech Mimid, Umachayel Matzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman atah l'chayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh hakol. And continuing silently. Oh, say shalom b'maroma, say shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, amen. Yahase shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Yahase shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. So tonight, instead of studying Torah, we're going to glance at Eicha, at Lamentations. And I say glance because we don't really want to read all of Lamentations. So we're not going to go there, but we will read a few verses of it. And I want to talk a little bit about it. First of all, the structure. Lamentations Eicha, which is attributed to Jeremiah, is 5 laments, 5 chapters, so to speak, that reflect on suffering and dislocation from the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple and the subsequent exile. It became the paradigm for Jewish literature of destruction. It eternalizes the destruction, making it a central event in Jewish history for all Jewish catastrophes. The theology is that the disaster is God's punishment for Israel's sins. The Babylonians are actually never mentioned in Eicha. And this is, of course, a challenge today when we read the Tanakh. How do we accept this text, a holy canonized text that teaches that the destruction and devastation that befalls us is God's punishment for our sins, whether by actual deed or by omission? And of course, the prophets, all of the prophetic writings wrestle with this challenge as well. Ezekiel, of course, was very rigid, very black and white. God is absolute, God is all powerful. Everything happens by the will of God and for a reason. Therefore, we're going to find a reason to justify events that cannot possibly be justified. And so that's our classical theological interpretation. Heschel is interesting. Heschel taught that God gave us, humanity, free will. As a result, we do make errors and we do commit sins. Some of the sins are egregious, some of them are errors, mistakes, inadvertent. And as a result of our humanity and our free will, innocents do suffer, and God suffers with us. We as a community, of course, hold responsibility, therefore, for sins committed by others, not completely, but to a certain extent. And how would we explain that? Well, Elie Wiesel explained it very well. Never again. The Holocaust happened, and many people stood by. And we, the world, have no trouble blaming all of the other peoples who stood by and let it happen, even though they didn't participate. But what Elie Wiesel pointed out is we Americans, we Jews, are complicit if we allow it to happen again. Not to us, maybe it's happening in Africa, maybe it's happening in China. If we stand idly by, then we become complicit in the evil that other people do. We are complicit. Rabbi Kushner taught that God created a world of beauty, with powerful forces of nature. There are opposing forces in the world, of course, and the opposing forces of good and evil. One example would be forces of nature. We have earthquakes, forest fires, and volcanoes. We don't believe for a minute that these happen because God is punishing us, but they are forces of nature. They're powerful and they can be very destructive. And so Kushner's perspective is that when bad things happen to good people, it may reflect these opposing forces, not necessarily punishment for wrongdoing. And process theology teaches that as we evolve as people, God evolves and grows with us. Rather than being the God of punishment and vengeance, God is the God of learning and growth. So some other perspectives on this rigid concept that the temple was destroyed for our sins, and for 2 millennia, we are paying for those sins. That's one perspective. It's a valid perspective, and it depends on your theology, but it isn't the only perspective. And so the focus tonight is to address the fact that Tisha B'Av, as part of our liturgical calendar, is relevant today. It is very relevant today. So any thoughts or comments before we go on and read some of Eicha? And feel free to unmute yourselves and jump right in. Okay, so as I like to say when I'm on the bima, if you say nothing, you totally agree with me. And I'm glad to see that everyone totally agrees with me. So for Eicha, I want to read through the first 6 verses, and I'd like to again do it antiphonally. Does anyone else have a desire to participate with an English reading? Okay. Yvonne, you're it. I'm going to go ahead and share the document.
Okay.
Okay, so here we go. Eicha. Okay, so Yvonne, do you want to start out with verse Aleph, verse 1, and read the English, not the Hebrew?
Okay. Alas, lonely sits the city once great with people. She that was great among nations is become like a widow. The princess among states is become a thrall.
Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheek wet with tears. There is none to comfort her of all of her friends. All her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes.
Judah has gone into exile because of misery and harsh oppression. When she settled among the nations, she found no rest. All her pursuers overtook her in the narrow places.
Zion's roads are in mourning, empty of festival pilgrims. All her gates are deserted. Her priests sigh, her maidens are unhappy. She is utterly disconsolate.
Her enemies are now the masters. Her foes are at ease because the Lord has afflicted her many transgressions. Her infants have gone into captivity before the enemy.
Gone from fair Zion are all that were her glory. Her leaders were like stags that found no pasture. They could only walk feebly before the pursuer. So what we see here is a beautifully poetic work. I mean, this is beautiful, beautiful text. And it's expressing misery, sheer misery. That is the focus, that's the emphasis, that's the point, is expressing the ultimate in misery. And so, of course, the metaphor is, as it is throughout the prophetic works, a woman. And the woman is typically described as a zonah, or a prostitute, the lowest of the low, the one person in society, in biblical society, who had absolutely no status, no rights, no recognition. She was like the bottom caste level if you're in a caste system. And I understand India is abolished the caste system, but this was the bottom of the bottom, slogging through the mud. And the person in that situation, the zonah, has no capacity to pull out of the low depths that she finds herself in. So the metaphor is very powerful. It's a really powerful metaphor. And I find it depressing, you know, if we were to read the whole thing, but the language is interesting. One day we'll read the whole thing. So any thoughts on Eha, on Lamentations, before we move on? Okay, so dirges. Dirges are elegies, and this became a tradition after or during the time of the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition. So the dirges, the traditional dirges, are medieval European compositions. And what's interesting is we have, as you know, the Sephardi and the Ashkenazi strains in Europe. And the Sephardi strains, the Mediterranean Jews, were typically lived under the auspices of Islam, of the Muslim rulers, whereas the Ashkenazis were under the Christian rulers. And so that's why so many historical texts refer to Jews of the cross and Jews of the crescent. Why is that significant? Because you don't find so many dirges in Sephardic texts, because the Arabs, the Muslims, were practical. They were pragmatic. They didn't believe in martyrdom. And the Jews who lived under those circumstances did not grow up with the belief that it's better to be slaughtered than to, say, accept Islam and remain a Jew in your heart. Whereas the Ashkenazi Jews who grew up in this Christian environment adopted martyrology into the culture. And that's where we get these dirges. And the Crusades had a major impact on that. And of course, Christianity is big on martyrology. And so we adopted that aspect of the culture. And so when we're looking at these dirges from the time of the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition, we are picking up this influence from the Christian societies. So typically they describe transgressions of the Jews and their love for Israel. The most popular ones written by Hakalir or Yehuda Halevi. And actually Solomon ibn Gabirol, who actually I think was Sephardi, so much for that. So the traditional dirges are focused on this martyrology aspect and the idea that the horrible killing, the mass killing from the Crusades, was brought upon us for a reason, and we are suffering for a reason. And what's the reason? We need to find the reason. I don't want to read any dirges from the Middle Ages because they aren't irrelevant, but I think we need to address contemporary concepts rather than medieval concepts in looking at Tisha B'Av today. So I came up with another dirge, a contemporary dirge, and this one is written by the Velveteen Rabbi. I'll give you 10 seconds to think about that one. The Velveteen Rabbi. Okay, so you all remember the Velveteen Rabbit. You don't remember the Velveteen Rabbit. The Velveteen Rabbit is a very famous children's story. It's, well, 100 years since I read it, since I was born before Methuselah, if you talk to my offspring. The Velveteen Rabbit was, he was a rabbit, and his fur, his velveteen was rubbed off because he was so used, and then he was discarded because he was worn out, and his heart was broken, and he became a live bunny rabbit. So he comes back as a live bunny rabbit with real fur, and it's a bit of a poignant story and a very famous story. So this writer has her nomenclature as the Velveteen Rabbi, and I liked the name. So she wrote this poem in 2011. She wrote it in August of 2011, following the horrible aftermath of the Oslo and Utøya attacks of 2011. There was a terrorist bomb in Oslo in July of 2011 and a mass shooting on the island of Utøya in Norway in 2011, July 22nd, 2011, which I'd sort of forgotten about. And I would say how relevant today that this kind of mass murder becomes commonplace, that we can forget about it and we have to be reminded of it. And that's the contemporary message today is, have we as a world learned anything from the destruction of the temples? So I'm going to share this document, which I will go ahead and read because I love reading it here. Okay, so this is After the Fall, a poem for Tisha B'Av by the Velveteen Rabbi. The Mishnah says, senseless hatred knocked the temple down, not the Romans with their siege engines, or not only them, but our ancestors too, who slipped into petty backbiting, ignored Shabbat, and forgot how to offer their hearts. We're no better, we who secretly know we're right, holier than they. We who roll our eyes and patronize, who check email, even on the holiest of days, who forget that a prayer is more than a tune, more than words on a page. In Oslo, parents weep, and we're too busy arguing motive to comfort them. Across the Middle East, parents weep, and we're too busy arguing borders to comfort them. In our nursing homes, parents weep, shuddering and alone, and we're too busy. Even now, what sanctuaries, what human hearts are damaged and burned while we snipe at each other or insist we're not responsible or look away. So before we conclude with Elenu and Kaddish Yatom, I want to ask a couple questions, and I'd like for you to take 10, 15 seconds, think about it, and just share what you think. First of all, how do you feel about Tisha B'Av? Do you feel that there's a message that is relevant to us today? Yeah.
I think that poem that you just read.
You need to unmute. Okay.
No, I think the poem you just read could apply exactly to today.
Yes.
It's a timeless poem.
Yes, it is.
Which says terrible things for our times, of course.
Yes.
And I always say man. When I say man, I include men, women, everybody. But
Yeah.
man has never learned and probably never will learn lessons, unfortunately. And I've been watching the prize, Eyes on the Prize, about Martin Luther King and the 60s and even the 70s, and what they had to go through, what Black people had to go through to get some sort of sense and sameness with a white person, which I suppose will never ever happen. We can't seem to look, when I say we, I mean the human race, cannot seem to look at a person for what they are, and they look at them at their color, and we can't seem to get beyond that. We want to, we do want to, most of us. The Black people have come a long way, and I admire them for that. They had to fight for every quarter inch of the way.
Yes.
And if we could only be equal, and I don't know if we ever will be, I hope we can be. I hope another person can look at a person and, oh, you're the same as me. Not economically and it's just, I think Tisha B'Av, I haven't known a lot about it in the past. And I think it actually is a very important holiday, holy day.
Holy day.
And I thank you very much, Rachel, for enlightening us this evening.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Catherine, you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to share a thought?
Yeah, I was just thinking that Tish B'Av, to me, it represents the universal mystery of suffering. And, the reasons for suffering are mystery to everyone. We can see the evil in the world that people do, but there's also a lot of suffering that's just caused naturally. It's not the result of anything a person did or result of anything anyone did deliberately. And all of that is a mystery. And I think Tish B'Av addresses that, and in the focus of the experiences of the Jewish people. But I think the mystery is universal, and I think it's because there have been so many distinct periods and distinct events in the history of the Jewish people that are easy to identify and well known, that have to do with suffering in various ways. I think that's particular to the Jewish people, but I think that the theme is universal. Suffering is just a mystery. And I think, but it's something we always have to ponder. We're always pondering it in one way or another. And how does that affect our sense of God and our sense of ourselves? So yeah, I think we take time in our lives to ponder those things. And I think pondering them together is very valuable. And I want to thank you, Rachel, for doing this evening. This has been very valuable. So thank you very much.
Well, and thank you. Thank you to all of you for your participation. And we've covered the gamut on the theology versus the mystery of suffering. And there's, a lot to learn from it. And certainly reading Echa, that is a classic description of suffering. It's the ultimate suffering, and how do we explain it? And we can explain it with theology or with process theology or other aspects, but suffering is part of life, unfortunately, and it always will be. So with that, if there's no more thoughts, I'm going to pull up our Siddur again, and we'll conclude with Aleinu and Kaddish Yatom. Okay, please rise and join me for Aleinu. Aleinu l'shapeach la'adon hakol, la'teit gedula liotzer b'reishi, shelo asanu kiguye ha'aratzot, velo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chalkenu kahem, V'gord aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shehu notei shamayim v'yoser haaretz, Umoshav Yikaru Bashamayim Mima'al Ushkina Tuso Begohe Meromim Hu Eloheinu Einod Emet Mokenu Efesulato Kakatu Betorato Vidata Hayom V'Hashivota Elevavecha Ki Adonai Hu HaElohim Bashamayim Mimal V'yal haaretz Mitachat Einod Okay. Kakatuv betoratecha Adonai yimloch l'olam va'ed v'nemar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yehi Adonai echad Ushamo Echad. So before we do Kaddish Yatom, I'd like to ask everyone to unmute, and we'll recite it together. And I'll put it back up on the screen so you can read it. And before we do, I'm going to go around in the order that you're on my screen and ask for names for Kaddish if you're in your Shloshim, your year of mourning, if you have a yortzeit, a name you want to mention. And I'll start at the top with Simon and Yvonne.
Your brother.
Oh, my brother Solly passed away a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
Yes, and a dear friend of mine from many years ago that suddenly passed away 2 days ago, Willie Wilson. It was a lovely man.
I'm so sorry. And Kylie, do you have names you are mourning for?
I do. My great grandmother, Mary Weiss, and my grandparents, Dorothy Marjitan and Paul Marjitan.
Okay. And Catherine?
I don't have any names. Thank you, Rachel.
Okay, and Howard, do you have any names, please?
Yes, but not unmuting.
You're
Okay, here we are.
unmuted.
Yeah, my brother Michael Goldman.
Okay, okay. And I will mention our niece Gabriella Axelrad. And I'm going to share the screen again. Okay. So please, everyone, rise and join me for Kaddish Yatom. And keep yourselves unmuted. And yes, there'll be some cacophony, and we're a community. Yikadal, Biyikadash, B'nai Rabba, Bialma, Biprav, Pirte, Biamlik Malkute, B'chayehon, Yomechon, Ub'chayeh Kol Yisrael, Ba'agala, Bisman, Kari, Imru, Amen. Yeheshu Merabah Mevorach, Le'olam Amaya, Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitramam, V'yitnaseh, V'yithadar, V'yithaleh, V'yithalal, Shemei Dekudusha, Brihu, Le'elam Min Kol Birata, V'shirata, Tushbehata, V'nehemata, Da'amiran, Belma, Yimru, Amen. Yishmama Rabba Min Shmaya, V'chayim Aleinu, Vel Kol Israel, Yimru, Amen. Oseh Shalom Bimramav, Huyaseh Shalom, Aleinu, Vel Kol Israel, Yimru, Amen. Zichronam Livracha. May their memories all be for a blessing.
Yes.
So I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight. And this is being taped live on Facebook, and I understand YouTube as well. And so you can watch yourselves again after the fact. And have a peaceful and contemplative and reflective Tisha B'Av, whether or not you're fasting. And it isn't necessary to fast. It's customary, it's not necessary, and I can assure you many of us do not fast. So, good night, everybody.
We love you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you. Shalom.
Shalom.
Yeah.